गुड मॉर्निंग, वेलकम टू वी लर्न में आपका स्वागत है। टुडेज़ टॉपिक फॉर डिस्कशन इज़ कंज्यूमर बिहेवियर और हम डिस्कस करेंगे इसमें मेमोरी सिस्टम। टॉपिक्स टू बी कवर्ड आर मेमोरी सिस्टम, memory process, concept of involvement, cognitive response model, or brand loyalty and brand equity. When we talk of memory system, what basically memory means? It is a kind of a warehouse, it is a kind of a storage space जहाँ पे हम informations को store करते हैं, where an individual retains and stores the information और वो future purposes के लिए हम use कर सकें, right? Memory processes are extremely important to understanding consumers, right? There are several views regarding the structure of memory and how it operates. At any given point in time, only a portion of that memory can be activated for use, and the remaining inactive portions of memory are not at all available to recall information stored in the memory. Now, what is the role of memory when we talk about? Memory basically requires collecting of information so that it could be stored in a warehouse called memory, and it can be used, and whenever it is available, whenever it is required, it can be taken from that storehouse. So we get inputs from some external sources, we process the information, that means we encode it, we interpret it, then we store it in the memory that is retained in our mind, and then whenever it is needed, we retrieve the data, we take out from a storehouse. Now, how informations get encoded? Yes, that we had just discussed in the diagrammatical form. First is encoding, that we mentally program the meaning of the message that is being trying to convey to us. The second is the types of meaning. One could be sensory meanings, which could be literal colors or shape of the package, which appeals to your senses. Another is semantic meanings, which has symbolic associations associated with it, right? When the another step here is episodic memories, which relates to the events that have, personally encountered with it. Then comes narrative. Memory stores information we require in the story form. Now it's a diagrammatic representation of the memory system, right? Here is a very elaborative system, a figure that shows how sensory memory, right, it takes your attention, then it gets into the short-term memory, and after a elaborative rehearsals get into the long-term memory. And with the passage of further slides, we would be discussing a lot more into what is sensory memory, what is elaborative rehearsals, and what are short-term memories, long-term memories क्या होती हैं. ये सारे हम चीज़ें स्लाइड बाय साइड डिस्कस करते रहेंगे. Now, when we talk of sensory memory, the first very input, that we talk about, right? It is the inputs are in the form of sensations, right? Inputs in the form of sensations are first produced by senses, and it is generally believed that there exist memory stores for sensation which accumulate all the sensory inputs and appear to reproduce information in a form that closely resembles actual stimuli. Now, we can explain it with the help of an example. If we close our eyes just after observing an object or viewing an image on TV, we can see the after image in our minds. When mind's eyes for just a fraction of seconds, that it usually happens, right? We're seeing a picture, we are seeing something running, and within a second of time, we close our eyes and try to visualize कि उसके बाद क्या होगा, right? तो वो हमारी sensory memory में include होता है. And when we talk about short-term memory, जो हमारा second input था memory system में, short-term memory is basically real, and believed to have short capacity, maybe less than a minute, right? And an average of 7 pieces of information. You can have examples such like brand names and symbols, can serve as chunking device to organize information in short-term memory. All right. Information in the short-term memory store undergoes a process called rehearsal, right? When we talk of rehearsals, and there are two types of rehearsals when we talk, those are forming our another step, which are called elaborative rehearsals, and another is called maintenance rehearsal. So when we talk of elaborative rehearsals, uh, it occurs in a very short term memory and involves using previously stored experiences values, right? So it's a part, elaborative rehearsal is a part of your short term memory. And whatever your previous experiences you have encountered with, what are your values, right? What are your attitudes? Only on the basis of that you evaluate the information, right? And then you add meaningful previously stored information to it. So on your previous experiences, your previous values, beliefs, attitudes, they form the basis, they form the subject line here, and only on those basis you develop your further stored information. Another is maintenance rehearsal. Again, it also occurs in the short term memory, and it refers to silent mental repetition of a piece of information to hold in it short term memory to solve a problem or transfer it to a long term store, right? If the problem gets solved in the short term memory, it's okay, but otherwise it gets transferred to the long term memory. Now when we talk of long term memory, right, long term memory, short term memory, when we talk, what the name itself suggests, short term, which is there for a very limited period of time, for a short duration. Long term means relatively a bigger time period, longer time period. The name itself suggests, right? So long term memory basically it is viewed as a relatively permanent place of storage where the information is stored for a longer. We use relative term because it's not a permanent thing, absolute storage of information, right? Absolute permanent place, but relative in comparison to the short term memory. The information gets stored in the memory system either for a short or relatively a permanent, a long term place, right? Information is constantly organized and updated as new links between chunks of information are formed. In case of long term memory, it is very vital to know that we constantly, it becomes a continuous process that we organize and update the information. We get inputs, we continuously keep on getting inputs, and on the basis of that, we constantly revise the information system. Okay. One more thing is here that information which is stored in the long term memory, it does not decay over a period of time. But yes, it appears to be forgotten because of interferences with retention. Now here we have encountered with a new term called retention. When we talk of retention, what basically comes to the mind? Retention means getting absorbed, which is retained. Now there are two types of retentions when we talk in respect of long term memory: retroactive inhibitions and proactive inhibitions. Now, what are retroactive inhibitions? When new learning interferes with information already stored in the long term memory. New informations, new learnings, new values are always bound to come into the memory system. But what happens when these new learning interferes with the information which is already stored in the long term memory system? It takes the place of retroactive inhibitions, right? Interferences. When one new thing and another old thing, they interfere with each other, then what happens? It becomes retroactive inhibitions. But when interferences with new learning by already stored in the memory system. Let me explain it to you once again. Proactive inhibition, in a way, refers to interferences with new learning by the materials, which are already stored in the memory system. All right. Now we come over to what are memory processes. We have discussed what is memory, right? It is a storage space. We use memory as a storage space, as a warehouse of information, of the values, of the belief, and of the experiences. But then when we use it as a warehouse, there needs to be a process, how we store the information, right? How we process it. So memory process is like processing of information requires that first of all it should be filtered through short-term memory, then stored in the long-term memory, and finally retrieved when needed. It's a subject here. Information when needed should be readily retrievable. All right. So when we talk about memory processes, information available for storage in the long run, in the long-term memory, depends on the amount of rehearsals it gets by an individual. All right. Now for retrieval of information, how we retrieve the information from the long-term memory system, there are 3 factors that are to be considered, and they are very important factors. Now it becomes retrieval. What basically retrieval here means when we are talking about memory system, so that whenever we are requiring an information, we are able to access this. Access to information as and when it is needed is called retrieval, right? Retrieval of data we use normally in computer terminologies, right? Retrieval of messages, retrieval of data. So these are commonly used terms. So we have derived here for memory process also, we have derived the information which is so stored in the back of our mind in the long-term memory. So whenever we are in a need to retrieve, whenever we are in a need of that information, we are able to retrieve the data. Okay? So retrieval process is concerned with assessing information from long-term memory stores and activate it into consciousness, which is there into our subconscious mind, subconscious memory. We activate it into our consciousness. That's the keyword. Now there are 3 factors that we had just discussed it. These are activation, placement, and transfer. When we talk of activation, it means activation of linkages between nodes. For example, advertising of iMac will activate various nodes linked with Apple computer systems. Now another refers to the placement. Placement determines which other nodes consumer connects to an activated node. The consumer buying a desktop computer may link iMac to superior graphics and processing speed based on more recent information. Transfer basically means process that determines the information consumer will retrieve from long-term memory and place it in the short-term memory. Now the topic that we would be discussing is involvement. And what basically involvement means in a layman's language, involvement basically means participation in layman's language. How involved, how collaborative we are, right? But when we talk of involvement in consumer, in marketing terminology, it is considered important for information processing. Howsoever a consumer is involved with the information becomes the deciding factor to buy or not to buy, what choices one needs to make, right? So basically when we talk, there is no single precise definition of involvement, but yes, there are underlying themes focusing on personal relevances. So one trait there are 3 traits basically which Zakrzewski forwarded. One was the traits of the person, which could be needs, importance, interest, values, and unique experiences. The other is the characteristics of stimulus, which could be such as differentiation of alternatives, communication media, and message content. Other is situational factors. What are the situations under which involvement and thus decisions are made, which could be purchase or use occasion for a particular product. These antecedents, these three antecedents like trait of persons, the characteristics, and the situational factors influence the consumer's degree of involvement, right? Depending on how he or she, the consumer responds to the advertisements, the advertised products, and the actual purchase decision. So the involvement basically leads to the purchase decision. Now, when we talk of involvement and they lead to purchase decisions, there comes a question of high involvement and low involvement. What are basically high involvement products? Wherein the consumer gives his heart and mind while deciding, right? They are considered to be very important to the consumer. These decisions, they're very, they could, discuss it with multiple sources. The consumer thinks it to be complex, either expensive or risky, right? So purchasing a car, a high brand car, is a high involvement decision, right? As compared to buying a grocery. So low involvement are not so important to customers. They are their routine items. They get used to it, right? Once a brand is established in their mind, or if the brand is not so relevant in that case. So they are not very important to customers. They have little relevance and evoke very little information processing, right? And when we discuss the differences, in case of low involvement, brand beliefs are formed first by passive learning, as compared to high involvement, where brand beliefs are formed first by active learning. In case of low involvement, consumer makes purchase decision. In case of high involvement, consumer evaluates the brand options and other alternatives. In case of high involvement, here consumer makes the purchase decisions, right? In case of low involvement, there may or may not be post-purchase evaluation. Now, when we talk of dimensions of involvement, first comes the involvement variable. The variables related to person, that is personal needs, values, interest, and experiences, these are involvement variables. For example, if a person who is deeply interested in computer is very likely to have personal interest in computers related magazine, right? He would be deeply interested in it, such as Digit, PC Quest, and computers, about the new developments that are happening, right? Stimulus or object variable refers to product or stimuli that consumer perceives to be closely related to his or her value system. The extent of risk perception, here we are talking about various factors here, right? The extent of risk perception the consumer has with purchase decision can also influence the level of involvement. The perceived risk is the outcome of consumer's perception of the chances of potential degree of resulting unfavorable consequences. The second is moderating factors. There are many conditions which may be present to limit the influence of involvement variables. Like a consumer is contemplating the purchase of a cellular phone, and the commercial the consumer is watching would be quite interesting. But suddenly what happens? Somebody noisily knocks on the door, and this distract the attention of the consumer from the advertisement. Or the consumer may not possess much knowledge about a particular product and fail to understand some of the information contained in the ad. This would limit the evaluation of alternative brands in the satisfactory manner. Any kind of distraction that happens, you know, hampers the evaluation of various alternative brand. Such situations limit the opportunity and the ability to process the information and influence the level of involvement. Now, when we come about involvement properties, uh, when we talk about it, the consumer's involvement represents an internal state and may be viewed to have three main characteristics. Involvement intensity, right? When we talk about involvement intensity, it refers to the severity of involvement as experienced by the consumer and is generally categorized as high or low. The direction refers to the focus of involvement, and involvement variables will strongly affect this focus. Now comes response factor. Response factor basically concerns how a consumer behaves under involvement conditions of different intensity. These factors include different patterns of information search, information processing, evaluation of alternatives, and post decision actions. Now, types of consumer behavior and the involvements. One is complex decision making, or you can say it to be extended decision making. Complex decision making best describes the traditional hierarchy model. The consumer first develops belief, then forms the attitude about their product, and then makes a thoughtful purchase decision, right? Another is brand loyalty. Here it is described as consumer making buying decision with little deliberation. Though they are highly involved, right? They are concerned about the brand. They will choose a product of the same brand. This reflects a deliberate move because of past satisfaction with the product and a strong commitment to the brand, right? Yes, they are highly involved in the purchase decision, but they are so well satisfied with the product last purchased, and the level of confidence and commitment to the brand is such that they buy the products of a given brand. Limited decision making describes a situation that occasionally involves some information processing. It is basically characterized by low involvement, but there are important brand differences. There is little information search and brand evaluation. The consumer forms beliefs about the brand, purchases it, and finally makes an evaluation after the purchase of a product, right? And because of that, brand switching occurs because of consumers' desire for variety, right? Then the brand switching happen. Another is, and the last one is inertia, which is lower right hand box. It is described buying behavior where a consumer forms belief passively, not active beliefs he make. Passively he makes a belief, he makes a decision as a habit with little information processing, and make a post purchase evaluation. If the brand proves satisfying to him at a basic minimum level, the consumer will keep on buying the same brand routine in his routine, right? This type of purchase behavior is sometimes referred to as spurious brand loyalty. It's not actual, it's spurious, right? Now, when we talk of cognitive response model, here a message is likely to be evaluated in the light of past knowledge, experience, and attitudes. Here thoughts are called cognitive responses and occurs to consumers while viewing and or listening or reading an advertising message. To measure these thoughts, consumers are asked either to write down or express verbally their reactions to a message during the exposure. Now, here is a model which says which has three categories once the exposure to the advertisement is made. One is cognitive response, another is the attitude development, and the last one is the purchase intention. Now, when a consumer is exposed to the advertisement, what cognitive responses happens? One is the product or message thought. Now, what are these? These are the thoughts related to brands or the claims made in the messages. There are two types of responses, particularly important: counter arguments and support arguments. Counter arguments are anti-position thoughts. The audience argues against the message content presented in the ad. On the other hand, support arguments help message acceptance. The ad should encourage support arguments and minimize the chances of counter arguments. When we talk about source oriented thought, right, exposure to advertisement can also lead to source oriented thought, and these are the thoughts in this category basically are directed at the source of the ad messages. Negative thoughts about the endorsers or advertiser, called source derogations, are among the most important responses in this category. If the endorser is perceived as unreliable, dishonest, or an irritating time, the message is likely to be unacceptable. Another response that could come as a result of exposure to advertisement is ad execution thought. Ad execution thought means advertising execution thought. While reading or viewing an advertisement, many of the thoughts that audience members have may not relate directly to the message or the product. Some of these thoughts basically may be possible to relate it to their own lives and experiences, or the thoughts may occur only the ad execution, such as voice tone, colors, or the visual qualities. These thoughts may prove to be favorable or otherwise. These aspects of the ads are important because of their effect on audience members' attitude toward the brand or the advertising message. Now, when we talk about brand loyalty and brand equity, these are two very important terms. Brand loyalty in itself is self-explanatory. It refers to a strongly favorable attitude towards a brand, resulting in intentional and consistent purchase over time and again. Right? Such devotion to a brand is the outcome of consumers learning that a particular brand can satisfy their specific need. That is brand loyalty. And when we talk about brand equity refers to the incremental value of a business above the value of its physical asset due to the market position achieved by its brand and the extension potential of the brand. Right? That brand has an incremental value associated with it. Then it becomes brand equity. Now, these are the two questions that you may be required to do. One is, what is the concept of high involvement and low involvement, and explain the cognitive response model. Thank you and have a nice day. We learn and keep learning.